Hello and welcome to episode 218 of the Sasuga podcast. In this episode, we're talking about wa. Ready? Here we go. You're listening to the Sasuga podcast, and you're about to discover how to excel in your work without being exhausted through practical techniques that you can start using right now. I'm your host, Helen Iwata, a bilingual Brit with a 3-decade career in Tokyo. I'm an award-winning women's success and business communication coach, speaker, writer, wife, and mother. Every week here on the show, I share my personal stories and favorite techniques around the 4 phases of the Sasuga success cycle, around self-care, planning, communication, and productivity, to help you enjoy more success and less stress. You'll also have the chance to listen in on heartfelt and eye-opening conversations with inspiring guests and hear answers to your questions to help you use your expertise, time, and energy better, and quite simply to bring more joy into your work and life. This is the Sasuga podcast. Hello, lovely listener. How are you doing? Isn't it interesting that while Japan often admires and looks to the West for inspiration, the West similarly views Japan? Japanese wellness writer and illustrator Kaki Okumura grew up in the USA and struggled to find a way to approach her health without falling into narratives of extremism or obsession. And instead, she turned to her Japanese background to better understand ways we can take care of ourselves to live longer, happier, and more fulfilled lives. Kaki now has over 67,000 followers on Medium, where she shares insights and practical tips for healthy living from Japanese culture for her primarily Western audience. As we chatted, it struck me that busy professionals in corporate Japan could perhaps also benefit from what Kaki shares, because it's so easy to neglect our well-being when we're overwhelmed with work, even when we're living in a culture where wa, that's harmony or balance, is so much at the core that wa is also another way of saying Japanese. In my conversation with Kaki in this episode of the Sasuga podcast, you'll hear Kaki's 4 essential pillars to healthy living, the pros and cons of perfectionism, and how I'm dealing with my daily Ichigo Daifuku dilemma, and much more. Okay, let's welcome Kaki. All right, I am thrilled to welcome Kaki to the Sasuga podcast. So Kaki, please tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Helen. I'm a Japanese wellness writer and illustrator. I write online. Just a little bit about my background. I was born in the United States, and I was there until I was in middle school, but then I moved to Japan. And, when I was growing up in the US, I really struggled with a lot of things around my health. It wasn't, the optimal environment for me. But then going back to Japan, I, discovered some lifestyle practices and perspectives towards, self-care, taking care of your well-being that had really changed the way that I saw health. And from that, I started writing online. I think it resonated with a lot of people, especially people who didn't quite have insight into the Japanese lifestyle. And so, that's kind of where I took off from there.
When you say in the States it wasn't the optimal environment, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think, if people listening to this, you might understand, but if you've grown up in the US, it's a very, go big or go home environment. It's people like things to be, loud and, like everything's kind of over the top. So when you think about healthy eating, like things like keto, Whole30, intermittent fasting, that's come out of the US, and people really take that extreme. Exercise as well. You think about a lot of exercise regimens, and people are really, they're really into fitness, and it works for some people. I think that's great. But I think for a lot of others who, aren't really interested in, or for them, it's just not sustainable to be working out several hours a day. They can feel, sense of failure or not doing enough, which I feel like is a very reasonable emotion to feel if you're not like eating salads all the time and working out all the time. So I've learned to take a more balanced approach to that, which I think in Japan is a bit more common.
Right. So that's great to clarify that, because when I first heard you say about the environment, I was immediately thinking of the huge portion sizes in the States. I visited the States. It's amazing. But you're also talking about like not just that, but there is the fact that when people get into fitness, they go into those really extreme types of fitness. So that makes a lot of sense.
I was going to say, I think the food portions is kind of a manifestation of that value of going big, though. Like people, when they go out to eat, they're like, you need to be full and stuffed at the end of a meal, or wasn't, properly eating. And I feel as though when we take that perspective, it's hard to, eat well, because that's just not sustainable for our personal health.
Right. And, when I read your blog on Medium, and I know that, well, I understand that, or believe that you are sharing the kind of the insights and sort of the great things about Japanese culture, especially with the Western audience. And at the same time, what I have a little bit of a sense of is that, because I work with a lot of corporate men and women, entrepreneurs who are in very, very kind of busy, high pressure work and life here in Japan. And I'm wondering if sometimes they are forgetting some of those kind of ideals of, what's great about Japanese balance and nutrition. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point in that. I try to put like an asterisk on Japanese culture whenever I talk about it, because, Japanese culture to like an old oba-chan living in the inaka is going to be very different from, hard, like super busy professionals working in Tokyo. And so that's kind of like that asterisk. And I think, especially when you are in a position where you're responsible for a lot of people, a lot of different operations day to day, it's very easy to let some of that, looking after yourself bit slip. And I think, I completely understand why that happens.
Yeah. Especially one of your articles, which really, it reminded me of what so many of my clients talk about, is that the one we talked about, kuchisabishi, right? And very often I hear from my clients about, we talk about a lot of things, but especially around self-care, and they feel bad because they're eating too much. And one of the things is that they think they're eating too much. And it'll be especially in the evening, they're tired, or and they just start, that evening snacking without really thinking. So for those who haven't read that Medium blog post yet, which I definitely recommend, it's a great one. We can link to that in the show notes as well. What are your thoughts around that, or what could you share around that?
Yeah, I think big part of my philosophy when it comes to health is that we should not just be thinking of physical and mental health separately, but they're super intertwined. And so, I think I don't need to talk too much about it for people to understand, but if you don't sleep well, it's harder to work. If you don't exercise, it's harder to sleep. That ruins our mood. It's like a whole cycle. And so kuchisabishi is also kind of a concept that leans into that. But
we should just define what kuchisabishi is.
Yeah, I was just going to do that.
You do that.
So if you don't know what kuchisabishi means, it directly translates to lonely mouth in Japanese. And it's a phrase that people use very casually. It's like, oh, I ate a little bit too much. I had a bad case of kuchisabishi. If you're like snacking, you might just be like, the kuchisabishi got me again. It's kind of a very light term. And so I feel like the word kuchisabishi is a great way that we can frame, people who might not eat in the most mindful manner, or instances in which we don't eat in the most mindful way, because it's such a human way to describe something that, like everyone does it. I think like loneliness, it's a very natural emotion. Mm-hmm. And so the phrase lonely mouth, I feel like kind of recognizes that, we're human. We sometimes eat too much. We sometimes don't eat the best way for ourselves, but to be empathetic and forgiving towards it. I think when people overeat, a common feeling afterwards is like shame or disgust with themselves. Yeah. Whereas if you kind of frame it as like that was like I just did like a human thing. You can brush it off. You can move on. You don't feel as stressed by it. And, when you do feel a lot of guilt and shame, what people also do a lot of the times is self-sabotage. They like have this belief that they're a terrible person, so they do the bad habit more, and it kind of keeps going. But if you can be kind to yourself and forgive it, then I think it allows for, more space within our minds to kind of shift perspective and move towards habits that might be greater for our health.
Mm-hmm. Our thinking is so aligned on this, because I'm all about like not giving yourself a hard time about it. What's done's done. How do we do things differently in the future? So on that point, so if somebody is doing that, they're having those snacks and like, oh, okay, I forgive myself, but it keeps happening every night. Do you have suggestions for how to change that behavior?
Yeah, I think, there are a lot of tried and true ways. You can get like an accountability partner. You can try removing it from your kitchen. Mm-hmm. You can, change the setup of wherever you are at home. So maybe you work from home and that's why you're tempted to go to the kitchen. So maybe you might choose to work somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But kind of the step before all of that, I would say, is I encourage people to take really small steps. If there's a habit you want to change or something about your health that you want to be different, don't do a 180. Don't try and change your whole life. But take small steps, do small changes, and you'll notice that some things that you do for your health, you like really enjoy. And you're like, oh, this is so much better. I love this routine much better than what it used to be. And it's so much easier to continue it. I think when it comes to health, a lot of people have this myth around like discipline or willpower, and that people who work out and people who eat well are just really disciplined, but really those people love eating that way, or they love exercising that way. And it's because I think they've taken the time to figure out the things that they enjoy and the things that they can do for a really long time. So if there's a habit you're trying to break, take small steps to change it, experiment a lot. And, eventually I think you'll find something where you don't need to face that habit, and it's something that you can carry on for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. Another mindset that I like to promote is, so there's like a Japanese slang, like YDK, and that stands for yareba dekiru ko. Mm-hmm. So people might be like, oh, you're a white, like, it's kind of a condescending term, but I find it kind of funny. It's like, oh, she's just a YDK. Like if she tries, she can. Mm-hmm. And this phrase YDK, I think, is interesting because they specify like ko, which is child. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, a child who can if they just do is, yeah, I would say that's the translation to YDK. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it's a child, I feel like, when we look at children, they don't overthink things. They kind of just do things and figure out how things happen. Mm-hmm. Whereas adults, I think have a much stronger tendency to worry about the outcomes, or think about like, oh, that won't work, or that's too difficult, or that'll be challenging. Yeah. But we can take a lighter perspective and be like, okay, how would a child approach this? Mm-hmm. I think that also kind of lifts a lot of that weight from our shoulders, where we become stressed about the outcome, but we can lean into more of that curiosity of like, okay, why don't we just try this, see how it turns out.
Because that's a really good point as well, because the Japanese culture, another side of it is there is a right way to do things, and that sort of almost, I don't know, it's almost like a fear of experimentation. It's like you feel like you've got, and if you don't know exactly what's right, you're not going to start. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting culture of perfectionism, I think, in Japan. And some people tolerate really well. Like, I think their perfectionism actually drives them to be more creative or to take more risks because they're so invested in doing better. Mm-hmm. But I think for other people, that perfectionism can actually be debilitating in a way where it's, okay, if this fails, like I can't fail even. Like, they don't even want to think of that potential. And so taking risks becomes a lot harder. I think also Japanese culture tends to be, well, I'll say American culture tends to be very centered on the individual, whereas Japanese culture is very about your place within the community. You're thinking about, I think Japanese people tend to have a very strong sense of responsibility, or think about how they affect others. And I think that can also make it challenging for people to take risks because, if we're not only thinking about how it impacts ourselves, we think about how it impacts other people, how other people might think of our actions. And so I feel like those are definitely like strong barriers within a lot of Japanese society.
Right. And so in terms of how people can kind of get over that, you've already mentioned, I would say, a few of that. You talked about accountability. You talked about doing things in little steps. Anything else that comes to mind, or would you say those are the main ones?
Yeah, I would also say surrounding yourself with people. I won't use the word like-minded, but people who can kind of be more compassionate. I think we're our harshest critics to ourselves. Whereas, if you have a very strong support system, and I think that's also part of, my approach to health is that you need to have a strong social health. And so, talking to, a trusted loved one, a partner, a friend, a family member. And I think more often than not, once we voice things we're curious about or challenges we want to take, they're a lot more supportive than we, initially think. I think also when you mess up, they're a lot more forgiving and be like, hey, it's okay. It's one mistake. You'll get out of this. Whereas within our heads, we tend to, really, we can be harsh on ourselves.
Right. And that part about, getting people around you on board, I would say is really important. This links back to what we were talking about, the kuchisabishi as well. And my husband quite often will buy me ichigo daifuku. Because I really like ichigo daifuku. The thing is that he'll get into like buying them almost every day, and then if I'm eating an extra ichigo daifuku every day, that does have a little bit of an impact on me. So I had to say to him this week, I said, maybe let's just ease off a little bit on the ichigo daifuku. I appreciate it. I really appreciate the sentiment. At the same time,
like, I cannot be eating this every day. That's so cute. That's right. So funny.
It's really important to voice that and to sort of share with people around you what's important for you so that they understand, right?
Yeah, I think I know communication is a lot of, what the Sasuga success cycle is based off of. But yeah, I believe really strongly in that. Like, sometimes we misinterpret or miscommunicate our feelings. I think I had to learn this on pretty early growing up in an environment where, I speak Japanese, but I might not always pick up on Japanese like nuances or ways that things are done. And that could be misinterpreted from both ends. So, someone might say something to me where like, I was like, oh, that was a bit harsh, but to them, it's a very normal thing to say. It comes from a very caring place, but I just didn't understand that. Or the opposite, a common one, when I worked in Japan was like the idea of keigo. So I knew keigo and I could use it, but sometimes I didn't use it in the right ways all the time. And people would take offense to it, but it really took some communication being like, oh, like, that's not my intention. Like I just speak casually in English, so that directly translates to Japanese. But being able to, overcome those things, I feel like has made a great difference in like my well-being in the workplace. And so, yeah, I've kind of carried that importance behind communication with me.
We're about halfway through this episode, and I wanted to check with you. Have you heard about less effort, more impact in just 10 minutes a day? Michelle said about this short self-guided course, as a busy working mother, finding time to focus on personal growth can be a challenge, and learning not to feel guilty about taking that time can be uncomfortable. Helen's daily emails were short and easy to fit into my schedule. The practical tips and exercises taught me not only how to prioritize my time and energy more effectively, but also why I shouldn't feel guilty about it. I highly recommend this course to anyone looking to improve their work-life balance. Intrigued? Find out more at sasagacommunications.com/less effort. LESSEFFORT. sasagacommunications.com/less effort. Okay, let's get back into this episode. Right. Yeah, it's all interlinked, isn't it, really? Yeah. That's when the Sasaga success cycle. In fact, so I'm kind of talking about things in a different order to what I usually do in the podcast episodes. But since we're on that subject, with the Sasaga success cycle, in terms of something that you've really struggled with, is there something else where you've really struggled with and were able to overcome that in terms of self-care or planning or communication or productivity?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. I think a struggle I had recently is that I actually had to take a pretty long break from writing. I was, there's a weird thing, and maybe other people can resonate with this, but when I meet a lot of success, it's almost like my worst fear because there's so much attention, there's so much pressure. And so I was doing really well, and I was doing so well that I felt overwhelmed by it, and I did a full stop on writing. I didn't even announce to people like, oh, hey, I'm taking a break. I just stopped writing, I stopped posting. People would email me, my readers, and be like, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? That was really nice to receive. But, it was a few months long, and it was, kind of something like hanging over my head for a bit. And that was very hard. And what was even harder was getting back into the writing. So, you kind of disappear after writing these newsletters every week and doing a lot of engagement with readers. And, how do you explain yourself? How do you, come back from that? And so there's a lot of things that like fears that I had getting back into it, like, oh, if people hear back from me after months, they're going to be like, who is this person? Unsubscribe. I'd lose a lot of followers, or people would be mad, be like, hey, you didn't tell us you were leaving. Like, how dare you? You suck. And then, I don't know, say some mean things. Like, you can never tell with the internet. So I was very scared, and it's hard to get back into it. But at this point, I did a lot of reflection. I think this is where concepts around like YDK and taking care of that, like more childlike, playful mindset. So not trying to take myself too seriously, understanding that my writing should come from a place of, like joy and the people I'm running for are not people who would be so upset by that. I feel like, I'd want to write for people who have room for grace in their hearts, and just trying to be more playful with it and be like, oh, haha, yeah, I did that. And maybe that wasn't the best choice, but I'm back and I'm going to do my best again. But also taking small steps towards it, not being like, okay, I'm going to do everything that I was doing again, but being like, okay, today I'm just going to write a subject line. Today I'm just going to write a paragraph. Maybe this isn't my best writing, but I'm just going to post it on Instagram. Okay, well, today I'm going to write a full article. This one will go in the email newsletter. Taking small steps to get back into it. And yeah, practicing empathy with that process. So I would say that, maybe that self-care, there wasn't that much planning or productivity going on, but it's really like, okay, if that baseline is not there of, doing this from a place of confidence and a place where I feel good about it, like that other stuff can't follow.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's very common, actually, isn't it? This you start to have more success. And there's a book. Have you read The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks?
I have not, but I'll add that to my reading list.
It's a great book, and he talks about upper limiting, which is basically what we just talked about. Is that when you're having some success, especially in your personal growth or your professional growth or whatever it is, and you're going to a different level and almost like a different identity, then that causes all sorts of uncertainty within, and then things start to happen, and it can be that you get sick or you lose motivation, or even like physical things like happen around, like people have like accidents and all sorts of things go on. So yeah, it's a thing.
Well, I feel validated.
Well, and I'm sure the listeners as well will have recognized this, or will start to recognize it from now as well. And then I love that you're taking what you talk about in terms of that self-care and taking really small steps and showing yourself kindness to get back into it.
Yeah, it really, that kindness towards yourself, I feel like has been really key in, getting back on my feet, really.
That just brings up for me, if you think again about Japanese culture, that there is a tendency to be quite sort of strict on ourselves, and related to what you said earlier about that responsibility and thinking about the people around us. And maybe it's a little bit different in American culture. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think something that I like to remind myself of is, this pressure on ourselves. I feel, well, actually, hold on, let me rephrase that. Something that, I do realize that Japanese culture has this, there is a culture of a lot of pressure, feeling a lot of responsibility towards other people in our community. But when I feel this way, I like to reflect on Japanese culture in the sense of the word wa. So I know you asked this question to a lot of the guests on your podcast, but I was thinking about it before coming on here, which is, word of the year. But I've been thinking about wa a lot because, wa is the word that describes Japanese things. Like washoku is Japanese food, wafuku, Japanese clothes, washi is Japanese paper. But this kanji wa is also the kanji for harmony. Mm-hmm. And so, and you can kind of interpret that as balance. Like, okay, are cells related to other people? And also, our health, how is it connected? How is, if we go overboard on one thing, another part of our health will struggle. Mm-hmm. And so, when I think about a lot of, feeling extreme pressure or feeling a lot of, stress or feeling really hard on myself, I try and think of it as like, okay, when I feel these feelings, another part of my health is also struggling. If I'm not taking care of my mental health, like my physical health is going to also hurt. And if I'm not, if my physical health is not doing well, like my mental health is going to get worse. And so trying to think things in terms of like neither extremes of like, okay, I'm going to, change everything about my life and then, go on like a positivity run because, I don't believe in rejecting those negative emotions. I think we should come from a perspective of accepting it. I think there is danger in just like promoting positivity all the time. But if we kind of accept that, like, okay, there is a lot of stress, there is a lot to be worried about, but believing that, you can handle it, you can address it in very small steps and not overdoing it. So going back to the idea of balance, I feel like has been very integral in, my approach towards when things feel really overwhelming.
And I love that you managed to come back to the word of the year, which I was planning to start with, but we got so much into the conversation that was really fascinating. That, though, does lead us into what I also wanted to talk about is your upcoming book. So, because that is the art of balance, right? So would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I have a book coming out. It's called What? The Art of Balance. I just felt so inspired by the word "wa" that I had to use it somewhere. But no, it's really been important in terms of like the direction I've been finding when it comes to talking about health. And my book is, it's designed to cover 4 pillars, which is kind of my overarching philosophy towards health and well-being. But it's like the first one is nourish, so how to eat well. Then it's move, how to exercise. Third is rest. So, how to manage stress, how to stay curious, how to stay motivated, how to not reach burnout. And then the fourth one is socialize, which is talking about our social health and the importance of healthy relationships, having strong bonds with other people. I think a lot of research has been done, but when you think about, people's rating their happiness or overall, how meaningful my life was, they refer to relationships a lot. And so we should account for that when we talk about our well-being. And so by talking about these 4 pillars, it's like I talk about, steps in which we can take to kind of improve certain things if we struggle in one area or if we struggle in multiple. I give, advice to people. You don't need to be in a certain age group. You don't need to live in Japan. You can really do them anywhere and every day. It's really oriented towards like beginners to advanced people or people who have like, done 1,000 different things to try and improve their health versus people who are like just starting out. It's meant to be like a holistic guide to like how we can think about health and approach it.
I love it so much. So for each of those 4 pillars, could you give us what's one thing for each that is most important for you personally? Because I'm guessing there are going to be different things that are important for different people. But, in each of the 4 pillars, what's one thing that you like for nourish? What is it that's really important for you?
Yeah, the one that I talk about a lot is hara hachibunme, which translates to 8/10 your stomach or, 80% full. Yeah. And I feel like it's the idea of healthy eating not being, just vegetables and salads and fruits and, lean meats or fish, but it's that we can still enjoy different things in life because food is not just fuel, but it's how we relate to our culture, how to relate to our communities. It's how we celebrate traditions and connect with other people. And so I feel like we need to acknowledge that when it comes to food. And so hara hachibunme is a great way to approach that because, you can still eat ice cream, you can still have like a really nice meal, but it's about not overdoing it all the time. And just practicing moderation in every day. So I would say hara hachibunme is a great one for nourish. For move, I think if you live in Japan, you might already experience this, but I like to emphasize the value of walking. So I feel like in the US, a lot of people see exercise as like, I need to go to a gym. And if I'm not sweating, it doesn't count. Right. Whereas I feel like, exercise is not, you don't need to be wearing workout clothes or sneakers to do it. I feel like walking is a great way to just be outside, get more in touch with your body. If you're like on a screen all day, your brain exists in the screen and you kind of lose a sense of, time and place. Whereas if you're walking outside, you're seeing a lot of things, experiencing a lot of, different senses, and walking's great for, boosting our mental health as well. And it's also exercise. So
Absolutely.
Tokyo's great because it's safe and lots of places to walk.
And it's actually, a lot of places are kind of closer than you think. So what I do quite a lot these days, if I'm going like for a lunch at the weekend or whatever, I actually just check how far is that for me to walk. And more often than not these days, I'll walk it. And, it can be like an hour to get there. But that's great. That's like, it's especially when it's a lovely weather. It's great exercise. I get to see parts of Tokyo that I wouldn't normally see. So I'm doing that more and more these days.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think, and Japan, I feel like you have to take advantage of it because it's so walkable and it's super safe. So I always encourage people to do more walking. It's also, even if it's not just like, and it's kind of trying to look at exercise not from the perspective of burning calories, but it's really about, okay, promoting my mental health, moving my body. So yeah, I encourage walking. I talk about that a little bit. For the other pillars, so rest. I think this one was actually the hardest pillar to write about because I took a little different definition to rest. So when people think about rest, they think about, sleep or relaxing. And that's true. Rest is about that. But I took the perspective of thinking about rest in terms of, sparking energy. So things that help us build energy. And I think part of that is not just, sleep, which is important, but we can be getting a lot of sleep and still feeling like really, depleted or not that motivated towards our goals. And so one concept around rest is kind of leaning into curiosity. So I talk a little bit about Japanese craftsmanship, and these people are they seem very like hardworking on the outside, but really what motivates them is this like endless curiosity. And I think they take on a mindset that's less about like, oh, I need to do this right this time, but like, okay, I want to experiment. I want to see where this goes. And so I feel like in a way there's actually less pressure and they can do so much because, they're feeling motivated by it. Whereas if it was, that pressure of like, oh, this needs to be perfect this time and it can't mess up, it'll be very hard to feel motivated by that. And so, I kind of talk about topics that seem a little contradictory in the beginning, but when you think of rest as not just sleeping, but how to gain more energy for life, that's kind of the approach I take.
Oh, I love that.
And the fourth one, so socialize. I think, Japanese culture has a lot of great examples of this. I think I like to talk about, for better or for worse, Japan is in a country that faces a lot of natural disasters. There's earthquakes, tsunamis, and a lot of natural disasters kind of have shaped this mindset of coming together in terms of in times of hardship. And so I like, in the book, I write a little bit about jishuku and the act of, looking out for one another. I think jishuku actually, jishuku roughly translates to like self-restraint, I would say. And I think it came into popular discourse during the Kyoto earthquake, I think. Don't quote me on that. But it's the idea that like if people around you are struggling, you want to offer your support, not take advantage of it. I think during COVID, during 3/11, that also came into play. People weren't partying. People were trying to save on electricity. People are doing a lot of donations. People weren't like going into supermarkets and taking all the toilet paper, which I feel like in the US we saw with COVID, and seeing Japanese response to COVID has also been really uplifting of like, okay, wearing masks, not going out as much, just looking out for each other. I think this sense of, I have a role in society and what I do, impacts other people. is not just good for others, but it's also good for ourselves, because it kind of strengthens our understanding that, what we do matters to other people, and we should be aware of that. And they'll also do the same for us. And I think there is like a sense of community, even though, Japan is a very big country, there's a lot of people in it, but being able to come together in moments like that, I really appreciate reflecting on.
Right. Yeah, it's very true. That kind of the support when people are in need like that. Yeah, in difficult situations. Love it so much. So I think we're getting to the time to start wrapping up, and I'd love to ask you, I was going to ask you advice for listeners, but I think you were going through those 4 pillars. You've just, you've pretty much done that. What else would you like to share with our listeners today?
Like tips and resources, or?
Could be tips and resources, just whatever you would like them to know about.
Yeah, I would say, well, something I've been doing recently is I've been reading a lot of autobiographies, and I feel like being able to listen to other people's stories and their challenges and struggles, and learning how they faced it, has been something that informs a lot of my own writing, but also inspires me. I think, people come from a lot of different walks of life, but you kind of see patterns in terms of, people struggle, face uncertainty, disappointment, and watching how people navigate it, I think, is a very human and humbling thing. So I think, when it comes to self-improvement, we like to, just Google things and hope for a quick and easy answer. But I would encourage anyone reading this to, pick up a book, slow down, try and see things not as, things won't always be like a black and white answer, but being able to reflect on other people's experiences, I think, is really powerful. Besides that, I would say if you're interested in more things I write about, I would encourage you to sign up for my newsletter. You can do that at my website, www.kakikata.space. And yeah, we talked about the book a little bit, but if you feel like that's something that's interesting to you, it's available on Amazon. They also ship to Japan. So yeah, I feel like that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, it's on Amazon Japan. I have pre-ordered already on Amazon Japan, so we'll be linking to that in the show notes. We'll link to your Medium blog in the show notes as well. It's, not only the writing, but the illustrations. I just love your illustrations. It's just so beautiful to read. So definitely encourage Sasuga podcast listeners to go and have a look at that. Thank you so much, Kaki. I really appreciate this. This has been so inspiring. I think so many insights and practical tips for listeners today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure reading Kaki's blog, and it was a pleasure chatting with her. We talked about Kaki's 4 essential pillars to healthy living: nourish, move, rest, and socialize, and the pros and cons of perfectionism. It can help you to push you forward or hold you back, and how I'm dealing with my daily Ichigo Daifuku dilemma. I've asked Hiroshi not to buy them quite so frequently. And here's the latest update. He came home with 2 scones and some clotted cream instead. Well, these are just a few of the highlights from this episode and this conversation with Kaki. What was the most meaningful for you in this episode of the Sasuga podcast? I would love to read your comments on any of my social media posts. I'm on Instagram at Helen Iwata or LinkedIn as Helen Iwata. And remember, you can like and comment on my YouTube videos too. I'm Helen Iwata on YouTube. And you can find today's show notes at sasugacommunications.com/218, of course, with a link to the self-guided course, Less Effort, More Impact in Just 10 Minutes a Day. as well as suggestions for further listening on related topics. And of course, you will also find links to connect with Kaki and subscribe to her newsletter and order your copy of her book. Mine is already pre-ordered and I'm really looking forward to reading it. And while you're connecting with Kaki, send her a thank you. Let her know what inspired you. I'm sure she would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening. Make it a brilliant, full, and joyful day.